You notice it in the silence first. The church is decorated, the music is ready, the guests wait in anticipation. But the groom never shows. Not in this wedding, not in many others. It's not just a man running away from commitment, it's a generation quietly walking away from the altar. For decades, marriage was the unquestioned destination. A man's life was measured by his ability to provide, to marry, to raise a family. Bachelorhood was considered failure. But now, in the West, something has shifted. The empty pews tell a story that numbers confirm: marriage rates are collapsing. Fewer men are proposing. Fewer men even see marriage as a goal. And yet, this disappearance isn't born from hatred of women or from immaturity. It comes from calculation, from observation, from a collective awakening that what once looked like a promise of love now looks dangerously close to a trap. The media doesn't talk about this silence. Instead, they shame it. Men are afraid of commitment. Men today are weak. But beneath the headlines, there's a darker reality. Men aren't avoiding marriage because they're weaker, they're avoiding it because they're wiser. They've seen the destruction left behind in the lives of their fathers, their brothers, their friends. They've watched men lose half their wealth, their homes, their children, their dignity handed over by courts that never pretended to be neutral. So the groom vanishes. Not out of cowardice, but out of self-preservation. He doesn't run away from responsibility, he runs away from a system that punishes responsibility. Because the modern wedding is no longer just a celebration of love. It's the beginning of a legal contract that, for men, often ends in financial devastation and emotional ruin. This is the paradox of the modern age: men still fall in love, still want connection, still want families. But they look at the altar now with different eyes. They see not just the flowers and music, but the lawyers, the judges, the paperwork, the risks. And so, the disappearance grows. Fewer proposals. More cohabitation. More silence where vows once echoed. It's not a rejection of women. It's a rejection of the deal. The vanishing groom is not a ghost. He is every man who looked at the math, at the courts, at the silent graves of broken marriages and decided not to step into the fire. He is not missing. He is awake. Numbers don't lie. But they do terrify. When men talk about walking away from marriage, they aren't just talking about feelings. They're talking about math. Cold, merciless statistics that make the promise of forever look more like a gamble with loaded dice. Everyone has heard the divorce rate, around 50%. That alone is enough to give pause. But that number is the polite version, the one people repeat to keep hope alive. Dig deeper, and the picture grows darker. Count the marriages that limp along in silence, kept alive only for the children, for the mortgage, for appearances, and the true number of failed unions climbs closer to 70, maybe even 75%. 3 out of 4 marriages dead or dying. Imagine investing your entire fortune into a business with those odds. You'd call it financial suicide. And yet men are told it's romantic to sign anyway. But the math doesn't stop at divorce rates. It gets worse. In courtrooms across the world, men watch as years of work are split in half. Homes they built are sold. Children they raised are taken for custody battles that feel more like wars than trials. Alimony, child support, legal fees, they pile up like a death sentence written in ink. For many men, divorce doesn't just end love. It ends stability. It ends freedom. It leaves scars that last a lifetime. And then comes the paradox. Despite these numbers, despite the devastation, 86% of divorced people remarry within 5 years. Imagine gamblers losing everything in a casino, walking out bloodied and broke only to walk back in the next week, paycheck in hand. This time it will be different, they tell themselves. The most expensive lie in human history. Men are starting to see this cycle clearly. They see their fathers, broken by decades of paying for families they can't see. They see their friends, dragged through courts, destroyed by legal systems that smile while they bleed. They see themselves reflected in those numbers, and they whisper, "Not me. Not this time." This isn't fear. It's not bitterness. It's risk assessment. Men are doing the math, and the math is brutal. Marriage is no longer seen as a sanctuary, it's Russian roulette with half your net worth, your future income, and your children's lives in the chamber. The terrifying truth is this: the game is rigged. And men are finally waking up to it. It doesn't matter how the love story begins. If it ends, the final chapter is almost always written inside a courtroom. And in that arena, men rarely walk away whole. Family court is not built on fairness. It's built on extraction. Lawyers bill hundreds of dollars per hour, and the longer the fight drags on, the more money they make. Judges don't know you, don't care about you, and yet they have the power to decide who sees the children, who keeps the house, who pays, and who suffers. For men, that suffering is predictable. The higher earner? Almost always the man. The one told to keep paying? Almost always the man. Custody battles? A coin flip at best, but the system leans heavily toward mothers. Even fathers who fought, who proved themselves loving and capable, often find themselves reduced to weekend visitors in their children's lives. And it's not just the custody. It's the crushing weight of obligations that stretch for decades. Alimony that feels like a second mortgage. Child support that doesn't just cover needs but bleeds into lifestyles. Legal fees stack so high they swallow savings built over years of sacrifice. For many men, divorce feels less like the end of a relationship and more like a life sentence written on legal paper. But the cruelty doesn't stop there. The courtroom rewrites history. Every argument becomes evidence. Every flaw is magnified. The woman who once whispered "I love you" now stands across the aisle, guided by attorneys who paint her as the victim and you as the villain. And the more you fight, the more they profit. Every motion, every delay, every accusation, it's money in their pockets and pieces of your life slipping away. This is the trap. Marriage is sold as love, but in the eyes of the state, it's a contract. And when it breaks, you don't just separate from her, you separate under the rules of a system designed to profit from your pain. Men are waking up to this reality. They've seen their fathers age 20 years in the span of one divorce. They've watched their friends forced into tiny apartments while paying for homes they no longer live in. They've seen the photos on social media, smiles hiding the devastation behind them. The truth is brutal, but it's clear: in family court, men are not partners. They are resources. They are the product being processed by a machine that doesn't stop until there's nothing left to take. And more men are asking the only question that matters: why step into the courtroom trap in the first place? From the time we're children, the story is drilled into us. Every cartoon, every movie, every family gathering tells the same tale. The boy meets the girl. They fall in love. They marry. And the curtain closes on a happily ever after. That's the comfortable lie. It feels good to believe it. It makes parents proud. It gives friends something to celebrate. It makes society run smoothly when everyone plays their assigned role. And so we swallow it whole: the flowers, the vows, the rings. We convince ourselves that love is enough to guarantee forever. But then comes the brutal truth. Marriage isn't just a ceremony. It isn't just love in front of witnesses. It is, at its core, a binding legal contract with the state. And unlike most contracts, the terms aren't fair, they aren't clear, and they aren't fixed. Imagine signing a business deal where the other party can rewrite the rules at any time, and the judge deciding disputes doesn't care about your side of the story. That's modern marriage. A man promises his heart, but what he really puts on the line is his assets, his income, and his future. The comfortable lie says marriage is about romance. The brutal truth says it's about resources. The comfortable lie says commitment is noble. The brutal truth says commitment, under these rules, can bankrupt you. And here's the cruel twist: no one tells men this part. At the altar, they're thinking about honeymoons, not courtrooms. They're thinking about forever, not custody battles. But the reality is written in statistics. More than half of marriages fail. And of the ones that remain, many survive only in name, hollow partnerships kept alive for mortgages, appearances, or fear of starting over. Society calls that success. Men trapped in dead relationships are praised for their duty, while in silence they wither. That's the brutal truth hidden beneath the lie of stability. It's not that men are against love. It's that they're waking up to the contract behind the ceremony. They're realizing that what was sold to them as a fairy tale is in fact a deal where one side risks everything, and the other side has little to lose. The comfortable lie keeps the system alive. It tells men they're incomplete without marriage. It tells women they're entitled to security, no matter how the relationship unfolds. It tells families and governments that tradition must be protected at all costs. But the brutal truth is breaking through. More men are reading the fine print. More are saying no to the contract while still saying yes to love, to partnership, to freedom on their own terms. The fantasy was meant to blind them. The truth is setting them free. Nobody wants to admit it, but love has always had an economic side. For most of human history, marriage wasn't about passion or destiny, it was about survival. Families married to merge land, to secure alliances, to ensure children had food and protection. Romance was secondary, sometimes irrelevant. The idea of marrying for love is less than 100 years old, and we're still paying the price for that illusion. Look closely and you'll see, marriage is still a transaction. The difference is that now, we pretend it's not. On one side, women have always understood this truth. Call it strategy, call it instinct, but it's rooted in reality. Feelings fade, but bills remain. Passion dies, but children need education and healthcare. A woman who considers financial security in choosing a partner isn't greedy, she's pragmatic. She knows that emotions won't pay for a mortgage or groceries. She's playing a game where survival is on the line. On the other side, men approach the same game with naivete. They believe the story, that love conquers all, that her affection is pure and free of calculation. They walk into marriage thinking their personality or kindness is enough, while ignoring the resources they're putting on the table. They think they're buying romance when, in reality, they're signing into economics. Take the obvious example everyone whispers about, the older wealthy man with the younger beautiful woman. Outsiders sneer, calling her a gold digger, as if they've uncovered some scandal. But in truth, that arrangement is more honest than most love matches. He knows what he brings, resources, stability, status. She knows what she brings, beauty, energy, youth. Both parties are clear on the exchange. There's no delusion. Compare that to the so-called modern marriage, where couples pretend money doesn't matter. They talk about soulmates while silently keeping score. Who pays for vacations? Who covers the rent? Who sacrifices a career to raise children? The ledger is always there, whether anyone admits it or not. The tragedy is that men often refuse to see it. They want to believe in the comfortable lie, so they dismiss prenups as unromantic, financial planning as cynical. Meanwhile, women consciously or not factor resources into every serious relationship decision. It's not malice. It's survival strategy. And this is where the imbalance emerges, strategic calculation on one side, blind faith on the other. One partner knows the rules of the game, the other doesn't even realize a game is being played. The economics of love aren't evil. They're real. But when men ignore them, they walk into contracts where they're the ones paying the highest price. What women call security, men call sacrifice. What women see as stability, men experience as servitude. Strip away the flowers and music, and you'll find the truth. Love may start with emotion, but marriage always ends with math. There's a group of men you rarely hear about. Not the divorced, not the single, not the ones who walked away. These men are still married, but they're already dead inside. They stay because leaving would mean financial suicide. They stay because the numbers don't add up. Half their assets gone. Alimony draining their future. Child support turning every paycheck into a lifeline for a family they're not even allowed to fully enjoy. For them, divorce isn't freedom. It's ruin. So they endure. Day after day, they wear the mask of the family man, but behind the smile is exhaustion. Behind the routine is despair. They signed up for love, for partnership, for a home filled with warmth. What they got instead is obligation, rejection, and a contract that holds them hostage. Look closely and you'll see them everywhere. The man who stays late at work, not because he loves his job, but because going home feels like entering a prison cell. The husband who drinks too much, not for fun, but because alcohol numbs the reality he can't escape. The father on antidepressants, not because he's chemically broken, but because he's trapped in a life that drains the spirit out of him. These men aren't counted in divorce statistics. Society calls them successful. It praises their commitment, their stability, their sacrifice. But behind closed doors, they are casualties just the same. They've lost their joy, their dreams, their freedom. They're waiting, counting down the years until the kids are grown, until the mortgage is paid, until they can finally escape without losing everything. And that's the cruelest part. They're not living. They're surviving. They're marking time in a life where every choice feels like loss. Stay, and you suffer. Leave, and you're destroyed. Either way, the man who once had ambition, who once believed in love, slowly fades into a ghost of himself. This is the prison of the walking dead. No bars, no chains, no guards, just a contract, a set of laws, and the crushing weight of responsibility. From the outside, it looks respectable. From the inside, it feels like death. And yet, society refuses to see it. It points to these men as examples of honor, of dedication. But what it never asks is, at what cost? What happens when duty becomes a coffin, and the man inside is still breathing? The walking dead are all around us. And their silence is the loudest warning of all. For years, the narrative was simple: men who avoided marriage were broken, immature, afraid of commitment, the eternal boys who never grew up. But something is changing, and it's not immaturity. It's awareness. Modern men are looking at the institution of marriage through a new lens. Not the rose-tinted fantasy sold by movies and family traditions, but the cold, rational lens of risk versus reward. And what they see is terrifying. They've watched fathers work until their last breath to fund families they rarely saw after divorce. They've seen friends lose their homes, their children, and their dignity in family court. They've seen the numbers, a failure rate so high it makes marriage look less like a promise and more like a gamble. And men, logical, calculating, learning from history, are deciding not to play a game that feels rigged against them. This isn't hatred of women. It's not cynicism. It's not bitterness. It's math. It's probability. It's survival. Because the truth is, men still love. They still desire partnership, intimacy, family. But they're no longer willing to hand over half their future to the state under the illusion that love conquers all. They understand now that feelings fade, that laws shift, that promises can break, and when they do, it's men who pay the heaviest price. The rise of risk awareness is evolution, not failure. Just as past generations of men learned to wear armor into battle, modern men are learning to guard themselves in relationships. Not with swords and shields, but with knowledge, caution, and boundaries. They no longer confuse passion for permanence. They no longer believe that sacrifice guarantees loyalty. They no longer assume that forever means forever. And because of that, they are harder to exploit. Harder to guilt. Harder to control. Of course, society resists this shift. It calls men selfish, cold, even misogynistic for refusing to sign contracts that destroy them. But the resistance itself proves the point: a system that relied on men's ignorance now fears their awareness. The paradox is that this new caution isn't killing love. It's redefining it. When a man chooses a partner without handing over his freedom, that's not weakness, that's clarity. When he builds relationships on mutual respect instead of blind trust, that's not fear, that's wisdom. The men who walk away from marriage are not avoiding women. They're avoiding destruction. They're not failures. They're pioneers. The first generation willing to break the programming, to question the script, to rewrite the rules. And the truth is simple: evolution doesn't apologize. It adapts. And modern men are adapting to survive. For centuries, marriage was presented as the only legitimate path. If you wanted love, you married. If you wanted children, you married. If you wanted respect in society, you married. The contract was unavoidable. But modern men are discovering something revolutionary. It isn't the love they're rejecting. It's the contract. Today, relationships no longer require the state's involvement. Couples live together, share lives, even raise families without ever signing legal papers. Cohabitation has become the new norm for millions, offering intimacy and partnership without the hidden landmines of divorce court. The bond exists, but the trap does not. Even fatherhood, once chained to marriage, has begun to shift. Men now have children outside of traditional unions, choosing commitment to their offspring without binding themselves to a partner through laws that punish failure. It's controversial, even taboo in some cultures, but it's happening. And it's happening because men are starting to value freedom as much as they value connection. There are also private agreements, contracts written not by governments, but by individuals. Clear terms, honest expectations. A prenup is one version, a way of saying, I choose you, but I refuse to gamble my entire future on the idea that feelings never change. These agreements don't kill romance, they protect it. They strip away delusion and replace it with clarity. And clarity, unlike fantasy, survives reality. Critics call this cold, transactional. But the truth is, love has always had an economic component. Pretending otherwise is how men end up blindsided. A relationship without the contract doesn't erase love, it forces love to stand on its own, without legal chains keeping two people together out of fear. This is the paradox that terrifies the old system. Men aren't giving up on women. They're not abandoning relationships. They're not running from intimacy. They're simply rejecting the structure that turns love into liability. And when men realize they can have companionship, passion, even family, without surrendering half their assets, without signing a blank check to the state, without living in fear of courts and lawyers, the spell breaks. The monopoly of marriage ends. Because here is the truth nobody wants to say: men are not rejecting love. They're rejecting the contract. They're rejecting the idea that devotion requires government enforcement. They're rejecting the notion that commitment must come with a penalty clause. What emerges in its place is something more honest, more deliberate, more free. Love by choice, not by law. Partnership built on respect, not on fear. A future where men don't avoid connection, they redefine it. The moment men began stepping away from marriage, the backlash was immediate. Headlines screamed, "Men are afraid of commitment." Talk shows mocked them as immature, selfish, Peter Pans who refused to grow up. The narrative was set: if you don't sign the contract, you must be broken. But here's the contradiction no one wants to face: while society points the finger at men for avoiding responsibility, the institution they're avoiding is collapsing under its own weight. Divorce rates remain catastrophic. Family courts are overflowing. Couples stay together not out of love, but out of fear of losing children, homes, savings. Yet somehow, the man who refuses to play this game is the one being shamed. It's a clever strategy. Shaming language has always been a tool of control. Be a man. Step up. Real men commit. The message is clear: your value as a man is measured not by your happiness, not by your success, not by your peace, but by your willingness to sacrifice it all for a failing institution. And yet, the evidence is everywhere. Look at the men who walked away. Many of them are thriving. They're building businesses, traveling the world, maintaining their health, preserving their wealth. They're not trapped in loveless marriages. They're not crushed by alimony. They're not watching their children get weaponized in custody battles. They're free, and freedom looks dangerous to a system that survives by keeping men compliant. Meanwhile, the married but miserable are applauded. The man who drinks every night to tolerate his home life is praised for his commitment. The man who works until he dies to pay for a family that barely speaks to him is labeled a provider, a hero. Society calls him successful, even as his spirit is rotting inside. This is the hypocrisy: men who conform are celebrated, even if they're suffering. Men who refuse are demonized, even if they're thriving. The shame campaign isn't about truth, it's about control. Because if too many men see the reality, if too many men choose freedom, the entire system begins to crumble. And that's exactly what's happening. The numbers don't lie. Marriage rates are collapsing. Divorce lawyers are panicking. Governments that once relied on marriage as a stabilizing force are watching men opt out en masse. The narrative of immature men is the last weapon left, a desperate attempt to guilt men back into the cage. But the truth is spreading. Men aren't avoiding marriage because they're weak. They're avoiding it because they're strong enough to say no to a deal that no longer serves them. The backlash may be loud, but it's also hollow. Because reality always speaks louder than shame. What if men aren't broken? What if it's the institution itself? That's the question echoing louder with every statistic, every failed marriage, every man who chooses freedom over the cage. For decades, society framed the decline of marriage as a male defect, fear of commitment, immaturity, selfishness. But what if the truth is simpler, and far more uncomfortable? What if marriage, as it exists today, no longer makes sense? Think about it. The world has changed more in the last 50 years than in the last 500. Women work. Economies are global. Technology redefines connection daily. And yet, marriage, one of society's core contracts, has barely evolved. It's still written in laws designed for a world where men were providers, women were dependents, and divorce was rare. That contract wasn't built for the realities of 2024. It was built for a society that doesn't exist anymore. So when men reject marriage today, maybe they're not rejecting love. Maybe they're not rejecting family. Maybe they're rejecting a relic, an outdated system that punishes men far more than it protects them. If you frame it this way, walking away stops looking like weakness and starts looking like evolution. Here's the paradox. Humans still crave connection. Men still want love, intimacy, family. They're not abandoning women. They're abandoning a system that destroys them for daring to fail. The question isn't whether men will commit in the future. The question is what commitment will look like once the old model dies. Will it be private agreements instead of state contracts? Partnerships built on mutual respect rather than legal obligation? Families formed through intention, not paperwork? We're already seeing the outlines: cohabitation, prenups, children outside of marriage, long-term relationships without legal entanglement. For many, this is the new face of commitment, love without chains. And maybe that's the cultural shift we've been avoiding. Maybe commitment isn't about signing a document. Maybe it's about choosing each other every day without the threat of punishment if it ends. Maybe the future of commitment is voluntary, flexible, and honest, not enforced by courts, but built on personal integrity. So let's flip the script. Instead of asking why men are broken, let's ask why marriage is. Instead of demanding men conform to an outdated system, let's imagine systems that serve both partners fairly. The future of commitment doesn't have to be darker. It can be smarter, stronger, more authentic. The question is whether society is ready to face that truth. Backhand index pointing right. If this chapter sparked something in you, share it. Start the debate. Because whether we like it or not, the future of commitment is already being written, and it won't look like the past.